We got the best goddamn product, so we gonna sell no matter where we are, right?
But my supply, the good dope.
The Greeks, they cool with it.
When you were 14, you know, you were arrested?
Yeah, 14 and a half.
For murder?
Yes.
Okay.
Several years ago when I was in another character I had, which now they portray me as Omar. Ed Burns was a detective and he was the arresting officer in my case.
From 2003 to 2008, HBO's The Wire gave viewers a raw, unfiltered look at life in Baltimore. A big reason it's often hailed as one of the greatest TV series of all time. One of the reasons is because of how real it felt.
One of my favorite experiences on the Wire was to meet Felicia Parsons. It was basically her story on screen.
And that's largely due to the fact that the people who inspired many of the characters are littered throughout the series, both on screen and off. Let's check them out. In the world of The Wire, Nathan Barksdale's actual street nickname, Body, was given to the young, expendable drug dealer Preston Broaddus. Meanwhile, the man who was really called Body became the fictional kingpin Avon Barksdale. It was a deliberate shout-out to the West Side players, a general acknowledgement without tying any specific character too closely to one living person.
You can't play him out of that lobby. You can't take a beating either, so the first thing you do.
But no matter the name on the screen, the core of that West Baltimore operation came straight from the biography of the real Nathan Barksdale. Nathan Barksdale was a true product of Baltimore's streets, a former gangster who defined the violent heroin era of the 1980s and early 1990s. He controlled the drug flow in key territories like the Lexington Terrace and the George B. Murphy Homes high-rise projects. The kind of life Barksdale lived didn't just carry risk, it guaranteed devastation. Over the course of his criminal career, he was shot more than 20 times. The violence was so relentless that he eventually had his right leg amputated below the knee. If you ever needed proof that the game was unforgiving, the real Body was living it, one bullet scar at a time. He was described as a magnet for violence, and his criminal record backed it up. In 1985, Barksdale was convicted of torturing 3 people inside an 11th floor apartment in the Murphy Homes, a crime that earned him 15 years in prison. That set the tone for his reputation. If Avon Barksdale on The Wire was feared for his ferocity, that feeling came straight from Nathan Barksdale's real-life brutality. The fictional Avon Barksdale built his empire on the same kind of intimidation. He ruled from the Franklin Terrace projects and had no problem ordering the murder of witnesses who threatened his crew. When Avon orders his enforcer, Bird, to kill a witness and leave the body on display, it sends a chilling message to anyone thinking about cooperating. That kind of absolute authority and willingness to use extreme violence reflected the real West Baltimore players whose reputation for brutality kept their empires intact. One of the unique things about Nathan Barksdale's story, and a major theme in The Wire, was the constant struggle to escape the life. After serving his time, Barksdale was released and reportedly tried to turn things around. He began working with the city's anti-violence initiative, Safe Streets, serving as a violence interrupter and counseling at-risk youth in the same neighborhoods he once ruled. But for many like him, the cycle is nearly impossible to break. Despite his attempts to reform, Barksdale eventually fell back into addiction and crime. In 2014, he was caught in a DEA wiretap investigation connected to the Black Gorilla family and pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges. He was sentenced to almost 4 years in federal prison. Nathan Barksdale died in a federal medical prison in North Carolina at the age of 54 in February 2016. His death behind bars showed how difficult it is to find lasting redemption. Barksdale was always open about his connection to the show. He even produced his own autobiographical docudrama, The Avon Barksdale Story: Legends of the Unwired, which featured an interview with Wood Harris, the actor who played Avon. The fictional Avon Barksdale, played by Wood Harris, stood as the ultimate antagonist of the show's first season. He was sharp and calculating, though not as business-minded as his right-hand man, Stringer Bell. His control over West Baltimore's drug trade mirrored the real Barksdale's reign over the Murphy homes. Avon's mentality was pure street, protect your territory, and hold your corners at any cost. Even after being arrested at the end of Season 1, Avon continued to run things from behind bars. He was sentenced to 7 years with the possibility of parole, yet still managed to orchestrate deadly schemes inside prison. Alongside Stringer, he supplied a corrupt guard with tainted heroin, leading to multiple inmate deaths, and then framed the guard as an informant to move up his parole hearing. This manipulation and ruthless thinking reflected the same high-stakes survival tactics seen in real Baltimore drug circles. Eventually, Avon was rearrested in Season 3 after the police raided his safe house, finding weapons and evidence of conspiracy. The parole violation sent him back to prison, showing his inability to ever truly escape the life, just like Nathan Barksdale himself. But the truth is, Avon Barksdale was never based on one man alone. He was a mix of Baltimore's real criminal figures. While Nathan Barksdale provided the name, attitude, and violent legacy, another real-life dealer, Melvin Williams, also shaped the character. Ironically, Melvin Williams, one of the men who inspired Avon, later appeared in The Wire as the Deacon, a reformed community leader. On The Wire, Omar Little was the stick-up man who robbed drug dealers for a living, but the real-life blueprint for Omar, the ruthless outlaw with a strict moral code, came from a man named Donnie Andrews. Born Larry Donald Andrews in 1954, he grew up in West Baltimore and was hooked on at a young age. His childhood was brutal. When he was just 9 years old, his mother sent him and his little brother to the laundromat at 2 in the morning with 15 cents. While there, he watched in terror as 3 men beat a homeless man to death for bus change. Andrews later recalled every disturbing detail of that night, remembering how he sat frozen, unable to move as life drained from the man's body. At that moment, he made himself a promise. He'd never be a victim. He once told Vice, "If you playing in the grass with snakes, you gotta make sure you're a king cobra." Like Omar, Donnie Andrews was fearless. He terrorized dealers and robbed stash houses with his .44 caliber pistol. Not quite Omar's .45, but close enough. The famous Wire scene where Omar escapes an ambush by jumping from a balcony was pulled directly from Andrews' own life. Only his real jump was from 6 stories high. "I had to jump out of the 6th floor," he explained. "It was either lead poisoning or take my chances. So I took my chances. I did it without thinking. If I'd thought about it, I might have taken the lead poisoning." What really made him stand out, though, was his personal code. He refused to harm women, children, or innocent people. He saw himself as someone who only preyed on the predators, a man with a conscience in a world gone mad. Just like Omar, he didn't see himself as a criminal. He saw himself as a necessary force balancing out the chaos. But even a man with a code can't always control the storm. In 1986, Andrews got caught up in a double homicide while working for drug kingpin Warren Bordley. Along with a few associates, he confronted 2 men, Zachary Roach and Rodney Young, outside a house on Gold Street. When another man, Reggie Gross, opened fire, one of the victims tried to flee. Andrews fired his gun, and the man fell. As Andrews moved in, the victim looked up at him and asked one simple question: why? That word haunted him for the rest of his life. He later said the moment froze him in place. The man's eyes, the pain, the confusion. Why for drugs? Because somebody shot Warren in the foot? Why? He asked himself. It stuck with me, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I'm still trying to figure out why to this day. That question would become the turning point of his entire life. In early 1987, Baltimore police suspected him of the murder, but didn't have enough to charge him. Then one day at the courthouse, Andrews ran into homicide detective Ed Burns, the same Ed Burns who would later co-create The Wire. Burns told him, "I can give you a second chance at life." A few months later, Andrews walked into the police station and confessed.
Years ago when I was in another character I had, which now they portray me as Omar, Ed Burns was a detective and he was the arresting officer in my case.
Unlike most criminals who turn informant for lighter sentences, Andrews didn't do it for time off. The prosecutor, Charlie Sheeler, remembered him saying, "I will cooperate because I want to repent." Sheeler called him the only person he'd ever seen do that. To make good on his confession, Andrews agreed to wear a wire to help bring down the kingpin. It was a move that could have easily gotten him killed. Burns later revealed that Andrews had to pass through 3 layers of bodyguards just to get close enough to record his targets. He succeeded, helping convict Bordley and Gross, and was sentenced to life in prison. While behind bars, Andrews completely changed his life. He kicked heroin, trained as an electrician, and began mentoring younger inmates. He also started communicating with David Simon, who was then a reporter for the Baltimore Sun. Simon would send him newspapers, and Andrews would send back detailed notes about crimes happening on the streets. Over time, he became a trusted source, and one of the reasons The Wire felt so real. Omar Little, played by Michael K. Williams, became one of the most iconic characters in television history because he captured that same mix of fearlessness and moral code. The fictional Omar was gay, unlike Andrews, but both shared that aura. Omar walked the streets in a long duster coat, shotgun in hand, whistling "The Farmer in the Dell," and every dealer in Baltimore scattered. Omar was inspired not just by Andrews, but also by other Baltimore stick-up men like Shorty Boyd, Ferdinand Harvin, and Anthony Hawley. Still, it was Andrews' story that gave Omar his depth. While Omar never got his redemption, Donnie Andrews did. After spending nearly 2 decades behind bars, he was paroled in 2005, thanks to Burns, Simon, and even the prosecutor who once locked him up, all lobbying for his release. Once free, he married Fran Boyd, one of the women featured in Simon and Burns' earlier book, The Corner. They had built a friendship while he was in prison, and when they married, David Simon was his best man. Andrews dedicated his life to helping others, starting the Why Murder Foundation and speaking out against the same system he once helped expose. In a fitting twist, Andrews even appeared in The Wire itself. He played Donnie, one of Butchie's associates, and Omar's ally in Season 5. In the show, Donnie is killed by a gunshot to the head during the ambush that leads to Omar's famous leap. Donnie Andrews proved that real change is possible, even in a system designed to prevent it. He died in 2012, but the courage, pain, and moral clarity that defined his life live on through Omar Little. The real-life inspiration behind the smooth-talking, chess-playing drug kingpin Joseph Proposition Joe Stewart from The Wire was a man named Oliver Joseph Johnson. He lived a life that mirrored the intelligence and calm ruthlessness of the fictional character, but his story was rooted in the real streets of Baltimore, long before TV turned those corners into legend. Oliver Joseph Johnson was born in Baltimore in 1936 to poor parents. His birth name was Oliver Burley, but after his mother remarried, his stepfather, Joseph Alexander Johnson, changed it to Oliver J. Johnson. From a young age, Oliver learned how to survive in a city where charm and brains could take you further than muscle. By the time he was a teenager, he'd already developed a reputation for being slick with words and even slicker with deals. People called him Prop Joe because he was always the man with a proposition, someone who could turn any situation into an opportunity.
Got a proposition here.
On the streets, Oliver stood out. He wasn't your typical street hustler. He dressed sharp, spoke soft, and played the long game. He was known around Baltimore's Avenue corridor as a charming playboy in fine suits, always moving through the city's nightlife with the confidence of a man who had everything figured out. He made his money selling top-quality product and mastering the art of negotiation. If there was a dispute, Prop Joe didn't reach for a gun, he reached for a deal. That mindset made him not only respected, but also indispensable. His natural knack for numbers and street strategy connected him with some of Baltimore's most notorious hustlers, including Little Melvin Williams, who would later inspire another major character from The Wire. Oliver was one of the first people to show Melvin the ropes, how to move loaded dice at backroom crap games, how to read a player's body language, and how to stay 3 steps ahead in a game where trust didn't exist. He taught him that the smartest man in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who knows when to walk away with the money. By the 1960s, Oliver was deep into the city's underworld. His reputation for calm negotiation made him the go-to middleman for dealers looking to move product without drawing unnecessary attention. But that same charm couldn't keep him invisible forever. In June 1969, he was arrested by federal narcotics agents at a motel near Laurel, Maryland. The charge was illegal methadone. According to investigators, he had purchased roughly 10.76 grams of the drug, an amount worth anywhere from $1,100 to $3,300 depending on how it was packaged and cut. The story got even stranger when reports revealed that the methadone supposedly came from the wife of a Mississippi doctor who was manufacturing it himself in his private lab. The bust showed just how far Oliver's reach extended. He wasn't just buying drugs from local pushers. He had connections stretching across states. Even in trouble, he handled things quietly, like a businessman protecting his investment. People who knew him said Oliver had a way of walking into a courtroom looking more like an executive than a criminal, always polished, always composed. Through the 1970s, Oliver continued to move in and out of the game, staying low, but always active. Baltimore trade was heating up, and Prop Joe was known as the calm in the storm, the man who preferred structure over bloodshed. He believed violence drew too much attention, that smart money came from keeping things steady and under control. He was, in many ways, the first to bring a corporate mindset to Baltimore's street business. But the game doesn't respect intelligence forever. By the early 1980s, the city's criminal landscape had shifted. Younger, hungrier, and far more reckless players were emerging, and Prop Joe's old-school methods started to clash with the new wave of ambition. He had built alliances with powerful people and remained well-connected in the nightlife scene. One of his regular hangouts was Club Chandelier. In 1984, fate finally caught up with him. One night, while working the door at Club Chandelier, Oliver Joseph Johnson was shot and killed along with the club's owner. The gunman was identified as Miranda Warthen, a known enforcer tied to the Barksdale crew. The hit sent shockwaves through Baltimore's underworld. A man who had spent decades avoiding violence through diplomacy was finally taken out by it. Warthen's name would resurface years later in an old Baltimore Sun article from 1992, connected to another familiar figure for fans of The Wire, Clarence W. Mouzone. Interestingly, show creator David Simon later revealed that the character Brother Muzone was based on a real Nation of Islam convert named Vernon Collins. Oliver's death marked the end of an era. He represented a generation of dealers who treated the drug game like a business, who believed in deals, not death. He was part of the foundation that later inspired how The Wire portrayed the evolution of Baltimore's underworld. In The Wire, Proposition Joe's quiet intelligence and strategic thinking mirrored Oliver's real-life persona. Joe was always 2 steps ahead, finding ways to make peace when others were ready for war. His philosophy that boredom kills more police than liquor or a bullet summed up everything Oliver believed about the streets. While the fictional version of Joe's death came at the hands of a younger rival, the real Prop Joe's end carried the same message. No matter how smart you are, the streets always collect their debt. The cold, calculating character of Marlo Stanfield from The Wire, played by Jamie Hector, was based largely on a real Baltimore drug dealer named Timmirror Stanfield, one of the most feared young kingpins of the 1980s. By the time he was just 25, Timmirror was running an operation that reportedly had over 50 members. His influence stretched across South Baltimore's Westport area and into the notorious Murphy Homes projects, territories where violence and control were the only laws that mattered. The real Stanfield crew wasn't just another corner gang. They were a full-blown organization built on fear and blood. They became infamous for multiple murders, enforcing dominance through sheer brutality. This wasn't the quiet, coded game of the 70s anymore. The arrival of crack changed everything, and Timmirror's rise represented that shift. A new era of younger, more ruthless players taking over from the old-school figures like Avon Barksdale's real-life counterparts. If Avon's generation was about loyalty and hierarchy, Timmirror's was about survival through intimidation. His operation was so violent and efficient that detectives on the case described them as specialists in terror. They didn't just run their blocks. They controlled entire communities. Postal workers were too scared to enter Westport because Stanfield's crew would intercept the mail and hand out the checks themselves. That kind of power, political, psychological, and criminal, made them untouchable for a while. But like most empires built on fear, it couldn't last. The violence caught up with them when authorities managed to persuade 15 witnesses to testify against the organization. That kind of number was rare in Baltimore's code of silence. But the public had seen too much. One by one, core members of the Stanfield crew were convicted and sent away. Timmirror's half-brother, Marlo Bates, also played a role in the operation and inspired part of The Wire's character. The show's creators fused both brothers' reputations into a single name, Marlo Stanfield, to capture that new breed of fearless, cold-blooded leadership that defined the streets in the 1980s. Marlo Bates was eventually released in 2023 after decades behind bars. But the cycle didn't stop there. His son, Marlo Bates Jr., followed the same path. In 2009, he was one of 24 defendants indicted on federal charges tied to the Black Guerrilla family gang, alongside several correctional officers who helped smuggle drugs into Maryland prisons. He admitted to conspiring to distribute and was sentenced to nearly 4 years in federal prison. He was released in 2012, but couldn't stay out of the game. Just a year later, in 2013, he was caught again dealing and in 2015 received another 10-year sentence. The fictional Marlo Stanfield, though more symbolic, captured this same cold evolution of the streets. In The Wire, Marlo wasn't motivated by money. He was driven by power and fear, the kind of authority that comes when your name alone makes people lower their eyes. When Stringer Bell once tried to talk business with him, pushing the idea of joining a peaceful drug co-op that would increase profits, Marlo listened quietly. As soon as Stringer left, he turned to his right-hand man, Chris Partlow, and told him to prepare for war.
Chris, tell our people to tool up.
The show's infamous vacant house murders were a dramatized version of Baltimore's real method of disposing of bodies in abandoned row houses. In The Wire, Marlo's crew, led by Chris and Snoop, used that method to make people disappear without a trace. It frustrated police because there were no witnesses, no bodies, nothing to build a case around. In real life, that kind of terror was exactly what made the Stanfield gang stand out. They used fear as a weapon so strong that even the dead seemed to vanish. Unlike the older gangs who survived by making friends in city offices or cutting deals with politicians, Timmirror's generation didn't care for diplomacy. They didn't bribe. They ruled with paranoia, guns, and psychological control. The violence was so overwhelming that it brought down the kind of heat no gang could survive for long. Eventually, justice caught up to them. Witnesses came forward, indictments were filed, and one by one, the empire fell apart. The downfall of the Stanfield organization became a turning point for law enforcement in Baltimore. It marked the beginning of more aggressive tactics and gang indictments across the city. The fictional Marlo story ended on a poetic note that mirrored many real-life figures like Timmirror. After years of terrorizing the streets, he wasn't killed or imprisoned for life. He was released. Rich, but irrelevant. In his final moments on The Wire, he stood on a corner in a suit, bleeding after fighting 2 young dealers who didn't even recognize his name. The sharply dressed man in a suit and bow tie, always carrying a briefcase filled with custom ammunition, was Brother Muzone, played by Michael Potts in The Wire, and he was largely inspired by a real figure from Baltimore's underworld named Vernon Collins, a man whose quiet discipline and aura of authority made him as feared as any gunman in the city. Vernon Collins had built a reputation on Baltimore's streets long before The Wire ever existed. During his time in prison, he began to transform himself, developing a new kind of persona. He leaned into the style and discipline of the Nation of Islam, even if he didn't follow its strict religious code. When he came home, his look said it all: the tailored suits, the bow tie, the composure. He moved like a man with purpose. Unlike the average corner enforcer, Collins carried himself with the calm control of a businessman. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, and he didn't need to be. What made Collins different was that he wasn't a reckless killer. He was a thinker. The word on the street was that he believed in structure, order, and control. He wasn't interested in chaos or corner wars. His approach was strategic, clean, efficient, and intelligent. That's exactly what the writers of The Wire captured when they built the character of Brother Muzone around him. In the show, Muzone is introduced as a professional enforcer from New York, brought in by Avon Barksdale to protect his territory after the East Side Cruise. Backed by Proposition Joe, started moving in. When Muzone shows up, everyone takes notice. He doesn't come with an army of shooters, he doesn't need one. His calm confidence is enough to make entire corners clear out. That That confidence is on full display when he confronts Cheese Wagstaff, Proposition Joe's hot-headed nephew. Cheese mocks him, laughing at his polished outfit and asking if he's in the nation or if his mama still picks out his clothes. Mouzone doesn't even flinch. Instead, he shoots Cheese, not to kill, but just enough to make a point. As Cheese falls, bleeding, Mouzone calmly tells him the next round in his gun is a custom-made copper-jacketed hollow-point bullet, one that will kill.
So you need to think for just a moment.
In real life, Vernon Collins was known for that same controlled intimidation. People said he could walk into a room and silence it with nothing more than his presence. He had the look of a preacher, but the mindset of a soldier. Some said his time with members of the Nation of Islam gave him that strict sense of order, while others believed it was just his natural way of surviving chaos, turning discipline into a weapon. But even someone as focused as Collins wasn't free from the violent world he came from. The streets he moved through were unpredictable, and respect could flip to revenge in a heartbeat. Still, what made him memorable was his refusal to lose control. In a world where most men were either the shooters or the victims, Collins was a man who balanced intellect with intimidation. On The Wire, that balance is what drives the next major twist. Brother Mouzone's presence begins to complicate Stringer Bell's business. While Avon Barksdale trusts Muzone to defend their corners, Stringer wants peace and profit with Proposition Joe. But as long as Mouzone's on the ground enforcing Avon's orders, that peace can't happen. So Stringer comes up with a plan to remove him. He finds Omar Little, who's still grieving the torture and murder of his boyfriend Brandon. Stringer feeds him false information, claiming it was Muzone who killed Brandon. Fueled by rage, Omar hunts Muzone down and shoots him. But as Muzone lies bleeding, he looks Omar in the eye and calmly tells him he's been played, that it wasn't him, that it's not his style. Omar stops, realizing the truth. Instead of revenge, the two men find common ground. Muzone tells Omar that Stringer Bell used them both. Omar agrees. That's when Muzone makes his move. He proposes they team up to find Stringer and end him. When they finally do, it's with the same kind of precision and cold logic that defined Muzone's character. Avon, angry after learning that Stringer was responsible for his nephew D'Angelo's death, gives them the information they need. Muzone and Omar trap Stringer at a condo site where he's running one of his legitimate projects. Stringer thinks he's meeting with Major Colvin, but instead, he finds himself face to face with the two men he betrayed. There's no speech, no argument, just a quiet moment of realization before they execute him. In the end, Muzone walks away just as calmly as he arrived. His mission is complete. He returns to New York and leaves Baltimore's chaos behind, handing Omar his weapon to dispose of. The cold, calculated killer known simply as Snoop in The Wire was one of the rare cases where the actor didn't have to play a role, she lived it. Felicia Snoop Pearson wasn't just acting, she was practically reliving her own life on screen. Her character mirrored her real experiences so closely that the line between fiction and reality disappeared. Felicia's life began inside the cracks of Baltimore's broken system. Born 3 months premature to a mother addicted to crack, she came into the world fighting to survive. She was raised in a foster home and would later describe her life as one that carried every strike that's against black people, being black, being gay, and having a criminal record. Her childhood was marked by trauma. At just 4 years old, her mother locked her in a closet and stripped her of her new dress just to sell it for drug money. Eventually, she was taken in by Cora and Levi Pearson, a foster couple who gave her love and stability for the first time. But that peace didn't last. When she was 12, her foster father died, and her sense of belonging died with him. Angry, lost, and trying to figure herself out, Felicia drifted into the streets of East Baltimore, around Oliver and Montford, places where gunshots were part of the neighborhood soundtrack. Former cop and Wire producer Ed Burns once said that if every person killed on Oliver Street stood up, there wouldn't be room for them. That was the reality Felicia grew up in. Her teenage years followed the rhythm of the streets, fast, reckless, and dangerous. By the time she was 14 and a half, she was convicted of second-degree murder after shooting a woman during a fight. Most expected she'd end up in juvenile detention, but the system didn't go easy. She was tried as an adult and sent to Jessup State Penitentiary, one of Maryland's hardest prisons. She spent 6.5 years there, growing up in a place where showing weakness could get you killed. It was in prison that she picked up her nickname, Snoop.
When you were 14, You know, you were arrested
Yeah, 14 and a half.
for murder.
Yes.
So you did 6 years,
6.5.
6.5 years in prison.
Yeah, don't forget my little 6 months.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, all that counts.
Seems like a lifetime.
After her release, Felicia tried to build a life outside the walls, but struggled to find steady work. Then one night in 2004, fate stepped in. At a Baltimore nightclub, she met actor Michael K. Williams, the man who played Omar Little on The Wire. He was immediately struck by her raw energy, her tattoos, and that deep, unmistakable Baltimore drawl. "You gotta be on the show," he told her. When Williams introduced her to the show's creators, David Simon and Ed Burns, they saw the same thing, pure authenticity. They offered her a small role with one condition: stay clean and show up on time. But even that fresh start almost fell apart. On the day she was supposed to make her first appearance, Burns got a call saying she'd been arrested. The car she was driving had been reported stolen, though she'd bought it from a friend, and a pocket knife found during a search landed her in custody. She missed her first shoot day, but Burns didn't give up on her. 2 weeks later, she was back, ready, and from that day on, she was always early, on time, if not before, every time after. That second chance led to one of television's most unforgettable characters, Felicia "Snoop" Pearson, the cold-blooded soldier in Marlo Stanfield's crew. Partnering with Chris Partlow, she became the show's embodiment of quiet, disciplined brutality. Her character didn't shout or posture. She simply killed, with chilling calm. Her performance was so real that horror writer Stephen King once said Snoop was the most terrifying female villain to ever appear in a television series. Casting director Pat Moran said Felicia had total emotional recall, using her real-life pain and trauma to bring depth to the role. One of her most memorable scenes came at the start of season 4. Snoop walks into a hardware store, talking to a clerk about a nail gun. As the clerk proudly explains all its features, Snoop listens quietly. When he realizes she's buying it not for construction but for killing, the atmosphere shifts. Her calm delivery turns the ordinary moment into something haunting. That scene, written specifically for her by Ed Burns, became one of The Wire's most chilling moments.
I'm gonna go with this right here, man. How much I owe?
But even as fame found her, the streets never fully let go. In 2011, she was arrested again in a DEA drug sweep and received a suspended 7-year sentence. It was a reminder that escaping the cycle she came from wasn't easy. Still, her bond with Ed Burns, whom she calls Pops, remained strong. He had believed in her when no one else did, and years later, that loyalty turned into something creative. In 2021, Felicia and Burns announced they were working on a new limited series called AKA Snoop, based on her memoir, Grace After Midnight. Burns's involvement ensures it'll carry the same raw honesty as The Wire. For Felicia, it's more than a TV project. It's her life's full circle. "Lord have mercy," she said. "It's going to have you crying, laughing, all the emotions you ever felt in your body or in this world." The man who tried to bring order and sophistication to Baltimore's drug trade was Russell Stringer Bell, played by Idris Elba, a character so layered, he wasn't drawn from just one real person, but 3. His name itself was stitched together from 2 actual Baltimore figures, Stringer Reed and Roland Bell, both major players in the city's East Side drug scene during the 1980s and 1990s. Like the fictional Stringer, they were hustlers who showed an early interest in real estate and legitimate business ventures. But the soul of the character, that hunger to turn street money into boardroom influence, came from a man named Kenneth A. Jackson, better known around Baltimore as Kenny Bird. Kenny Bird was one of those rare gangsters who understood business as well as he understood the streets. Coming up on the East Side during the boom, he managed to dodge several serious charges and was later named in federal affidavits as a lieutenant under legendary dealer Little Melvin. Jackson always denied those claims, but the connections ran deep. By the mid-80s, he was already investing his drug profits into small businesses, a mini-market, a shoe store, and even his mother's company, KAJ Enterprises. His real headquarters, though, was the El Dorado Lounge, a popular night spot where deals, business meetings, and political connections came together under one roof. Just like Stringer Bell, Kenneth Jackson wasn't content to stay in the underworld. He wanted to blend in with the city's power players. and he knew that in Baltimore, politics opened doors. In the mid-1990s, his donations to local politicians, Senator Larry Young and City Council President Lawrence Bell, helped him secure a liquor license for one of his businesses. He even had dealings with Mayor Kurt Schmoke, who himself would make an appearance in The Wire. Later, in 2000, Jackson entered a real estate deal with future Mayor Sheila Dixon, an episode mirrored on the show when the fictional council president Nerese Campbell faced backlash for doing business with alleged drug dealers. By his late 20s, Kenneth Jackson was already one of Baltimore's sharpest operators, walking that thin line between legitimacy and the streets. He eventually went back to school, earning a business degree from American Intercontinental University in 2007. It was a fitting move for a man who spent his life studying the game. When asked about his past, Jackson didn't shy away from it. "I'm not looking to run from my past," he said, "but I'm not looking to dwell on it either." Stringer Bell was built in that same image, a man with street instincts and corporate ambition. While Avon Barksdale ruled the corners through muscle and loyalty, Stringer wanted to rule them through systems and structure. He was the brains behind the operation, the one who spent drug money not on flash, but on self-education. He took college courses in macroeconomics and business management, learning about supply and demand like any Wall Street executive. When police later searched his apartment, they found a copy of The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, the Bible of capitalism. Under Stringer's leadership, the Barksdale organization evolved from a street gang into something resembling a corporation. He banned cell phones, enforced code words, and made his people communicate through pagers to stay off the police radar. When Avon got locked up, Stringer ran the business with an almost corporate discipline. Later, he co-founded the New Day Co-op with Proposition Joe, a collective of drug dealers who agreed to buy in bulk and reduce violence to keep police attention away. It was business logic applied to the streets. But Stringer also had his limits. His obsession with legitimacy became his undoing. He wanted to be taken seriously in the boardroom, but he didn't understand that the game up there was dirtier than the one on the corners. He invested heavily in a luxury condo project and poured money into political connections, trusting State Senator Clay Davis to grease the right wheels. Instead, Davis took his money and ran, leaving Stringer humiliated. When Detective Freeman later investigated the scheme, Davis laughed and admitted how easy it was to con a man named Bell, who thought he was ready for the big leagues. The man who mastered street economics got played by city politics. Meanwhile, the weight of balancing both worlds pushed Stringer into dangerous territory. In his quest for stability, he made two moves that destroyed everything he'd built. First, he secretly ordered the prison murder of Avon's nephew, D'Angelo Barksdale, fearing D'Angelo might turn on them. Then, he betrayed Avon himself, leaking the location of a Barksdale stash house to the police in hopes of ending a bloody turf war with Marlo Stanfield. When the truth came out, the fallout was instant. Stringer confessed to Avon about D'Angelo's death, trying to justify it as business. At the same time, Omar Little and brother Mouzone learned that Stringer had played them against each other by lying about who killed Omar's boyfriend Brandon. Avon, disgusted and betrayed, finally gave Mouzone what he wanted, the location of Stringer Bell. That led to one of The Wire's most powerful scenes. Omar and Mouzone tracked Stringer to his construction site, the same place he dreamed would mark his entry into legitimate business. Surrounded by steel and concrete, Stringer finally faced the consequences of trying to escape the life he built. Cornered, he could only accept what was coming. The two men he'd manipulated stood over him, and the street passed judgment. They executed him, ending the life of a man who tried to climb out of the game, but couldn't outrun its gravity. In the aftermath, the Barksdale empire collapsed, paving the way for the colder, more ruthless Marlo Stanfield era.